and invest you.
That's great. What kind of pulls you into writing? What drew you into this particular project, this internship? I know I was on a panel and you were all in the audience, but besides my wonderful talk, what made you want to be a part of this internship?
Um, I really liked how it was very conceptual. I like things where you think outside the box, and I like challenges. I've always liked to write speeches and have have an audience where people are listening to what I'm saying or what I'm writing. And I think that this fulfilled all of that. I like how what you say can actually affect an audience, and you feel like what you're writing for an actual purpose. And I think that that's great.
How is script writing different than poetry, Lindsay?
Well, one thing that I got to do with my piece is add poetry in script writing so that can be inclusive. And it basically can take any kind or any form of creative writing and, include it. So I think that it takes a lot for a person to think in many different voices or, from different angles and include those in their writing. So that was difficult. And that's a big difference from poetry. You have to actually think from another person's perspective. So that's a big difference, but I did enjoy it.
One of the things we talked about was that when you're writing for scripts, it's like a good speech writer. And a good speech writer has to be three different people. They have to be the person that they're writing for. They have to represent the audience listening to that person. And then they have to bring to the table the talent and skill that they have in crafting an effective speech. And in some respects, that's what we did this whole quarter, of evolving from a flat page into something that was a conversation among people. And one of the parts that was a very important part in the beginning was the research side of it, where we went through volumes and volumes of Dr. King's writings. Ashley, what was your experience in doing the research? Because you did a lot of research in the beginning.
Definitely. Dr. King was an amazing writer, which is something that I think we all sort of know on some level, but until you really get into his work and his words, you don't really realize the level of skill he had. Not only was he a tremendous civil rights leader, he was a writer of his own right. And going through that work, you find so many little things that you'll see he'll do over and over again. He has a certain way of forming a sentence, a certain way of getting across an idea. And he recycles that all the time. So it's something I've learned as a writer. You find something that works and then you use it again and again and again in a different way to sort of make your writing cohesive and to keep it effective.
Lindsay, did you notice that he was able to, I'll ask it this way, how was he able to address different audiences? Because he had his PhD and he was a minister, but people only saw him as a civil rights leader. But in our research, he talked to other groups of people in Europe and in New York and places like that. How did he adapt his writing style to meet the audience?
Well, the beautiful thing about it, and it's quite ironic that a scriptwriter has to write from different angles. That's the same thing that Martin Luther King did. He didn't just think about himself or his own opinion. He thought on many different, perspectives. And I think that's how he was able to, not only write these wonderful speeches, but he was also able to fight for human rights, not just the rights of a woman, a man, or a child, but everyone's rights.
How did you find, even though it was 40 years old, and plus a lot of the research that you guys did for us, how did you find how relevant his words were? Was there anything that in your research that you read that he had written that really applies in 2009?
Yeah, when I was researching, that was the most I got out of while I was researching. It amazed me how much, if you would just take out little words that he said and replace it with a word that might be more relevant today, that it applies just as much as it did then. And it just shows you how true his words were. And just as far, I had a lot of respect for his writing in the sense that, like we said, he was always talking to different groups of people. And he knew that not everyone always agreed with him, but he just always had a way of just enticing the crowd, trancing the crowd in, and just allowing the crowd to listen, whether you agreed with him or not. And that was something that I really respected about his speeches and what I found fascinating.
A lot of times we refer to the beloved community. And it seems that in your research that everything that he wrote defined what he called the beloved community. So he was able to adjust, it seemed, to whoever he was talking to be able to hook the audience it's what a scriptwriter does, hook the audience and then give them the message of the day. And that's what he did. Remember when we did research in the beginning, like a lot of times his first 2 paragraphs were setting the stage of what the issue was at hand. And then he would give you a little bit of a zinger, and then give you a couple more paragraphs that further explained the concept, and then another zinger. And he always ended in challenging the audience to understand the issue and take a place in that issue to make a difference in their world. Did you find, who worked on the American Dream? Was there anything in the American Dream speech, which is one that people don't hear very often, that really kind of made a note with you? You know, because he delivered that at Ebenezer Baptist Church in 1965 in Georgia. Was there anything in that speech or any other speeches that he gave that really resonate how he got through to people well?
I think it was in that speech, and he might have used it in a few others, that he gave the example of going to Jamaica. And he loved to tell stories in his speeches. He loved to say, oh, Mrs. King and I, we were in Jamaica recently, and it's this beautiful island. And then he went on to explain that while he was there, the Jamaicans taught him that even though the Jamaican community is made up of all these different types of people from all over the world, they don't consider each other, Indian, English, all these different races or ethnicities. They consider themselves one big family of Jamaicans. And he was all about bringing that message back with him and spreading that and saying, we're all Americans. We are all humans. We all are equal. And it doesn't matter all these different places that we come from. You're an individual, and that's important, but you're also part of a much bigger family and a much bigger community.
Did you find that he often recycled some of his stories too?
Oh, absolutely. And what I really enjoyed that speech, just because basically everything he was saying was it was very basic, very fundamental values, but just the way he just has a way of bringing everything back to those basics that it's hard to disagree with him. It's hard to even really challenge him. And so, he does those things, like you said, he gets very conversational. He kind of makes himself like a lovable character. So if you're in the audience, you want to listen to him. And then he draws you in with that. And then he just is basically telling you just basic fundamental values. And by the end of that, when he's trying to challenge you, you don't want to disagree with him. You enjoy everything he's saying. You feel empowered, you feel inspired, and you get a lot out of what he's saying.
It sounds like he had the best blend of being a minister and having his PhD. So he had the knowledge to be able to really hook you, but then he had the persona of a minister that knew how to really rock a crowd, and that's what I saw a lot, because whenever you look at the old tapes of him, he's in a very commanding position. You know that he knows what he's talking about. You know what his role is there. So after we did the research portion of it, the next thing that we did is we tried to determine which stories would be the best stories, to try and come up with 3 or 4 scenes that worked very well for us. How did you find that process of trying to sort through all the volumes of information?
It seems that what you were saying about the zingers is that